Hello and welcome to today's video. So in this one, I'm going to be testing out the Elegoo 8K resin to see what the quality is like on 3D printed miniatures, things like some busts and statues as well, and just let you know whether or not it's worthwhile you picking up some of this to go with your 8K printer. So ever since grabbing the Elegoo Saturn II, I figured it was time that I tried out some of the 8K resin to see whether or not it made an actual difference between something like the Elegoo ABS-like resin that I tend to go to. Primarily, I print off a lot of 3D printed wargaming miniatures, so that detail really does make quite a bit of difference. But lately as well, I've tried out a few different busts as well. I really like the way they started to come out, so I figured it'd be interesting to see how they compare to other things I've done. I'll also be testing out the durability of the resin to see just how much of a drop it can take, and just going through some other discoveries I've made with it as well. So first up, let's talk about the stuff that I actually disliked about the resin. So the first thing is it's thick, like a really thick, gloopy resin. Working with this resin is not great, and what I mean by that is it literally just gets everywhere. It's a really messy resin compared to other things I've used. Cleaning up afterwards when you kind of take them off the build plate, I found that anything I was using to soak it up, wipe up that excess resin, it just got everywhere. It's really sticky. It was a very, very messy, thick resin. And with that thick, messy resin comes other issues, like trying to clean them up, for example, putting them into my wash and cure station. It basically clogged up the wash and cure station pretty quickly because it was so thick, the amount of stuff that just retained on there. For this, if you are going to go with this resin, I would definitely recommend having a couple of different baths of IPA, so you could dip them in there first in like a dirty bath and then like a medium bath before you put them into like your final solution, because it does retain a lot of excess resin on your printed miniatures that you're going to need to clean off. With the thick and gloopiness as well, it's one of the first resins that I've really been able to smell. Like, you can tell when it's printing. And the Elegoo Saturn II has the built-in filter, but even with that, unlike my other resins where you just cannot smell them, I could really smell this, especially when you pop the lid off. It really hits you. It's a very smelly resin. It's not awful. It's not like the end of the world type thing, but you can definitely smell it once it's going. And now, of that aside, they're just some of like the anecdotal things that I discovered while I was using it. Let's move on to other things. And I've got to say, I'm really, really impressed with the quality on these. So I printed off these two busts by Mammoth Factory. And when I was first printing them off, I wasn't really seeing anything, but it's when you start to compare it to previous resins that aren't obviously the 8K resin that you do start to see some slight detail there. Things like his armor, for example, just show up just a little bit more. There's a bit more definition, for example, on his face. On some of the things like his hammer as well, there's some texture there that you can really start to see on the 8K version of it. Now bear in mind that the 8K is this like dark grey versus this light grey, so some details will probably show up just a little bit better. But overall, when it's in front of me, I can see a difference. You have to look for it. Like, I wouldn't notice it if I wasn't really searching for it, but it's there. The other things that I printed off as well are these standard little demons from one-page rules as well, and they're what I use in my drop test, which we will come on to soon. And again with these, you can just about see a little bit more detail. Could be because it's a darker resin and I'm looking for things and it's more of a placebo than anything, but in my opinion, it does look a little bit better than other types of resin. And then I went with this Henry Cavill Superman bust. I've got to say, this came out really, really well. This isn't hollowed out or anything else, and I wanted to see how well it would all stick, how well it would all stay together once it's lifting out. Something that's larger, for example, I just wanted to see how well it turned out. The only issue that this one had is at the top on his face, there's a slight layer line where something must have happened towards the end of that print, but all in all, this came out looking absolutely superb. Once I got it primed up, it really took paint very nicely, and the quality of this looks absolutely fantastic. He's got all this sort of detail on his suit, these little like hexagonal patterns, and you can really, really see it. And that's after having a prime on there as well. All in all, this resin looks fantastic. It's not the biggest jump up in the world, like their advertisements make it seem like it's gonna be night and day. In my opinion, versus like the previous ABS-like resins, the Elegoo ABS-like resin is my favorite go-to resin. There's not something that you will literally be able to see straight away, but there's definitely a little bit of a difference. So if absolute top tier quality of your prints is what you're after, this resin definitely, in my opinion, is one of the best when it comes to quality that I've used. Now, moving on to the drop test, and things weren't as forgiving as like previous things. And I suppose this is more of a testament to other resins that I've used. When they have that ABS-like moniker and all this labeling and everything, they're not the most robust thing in the world, but they're more robust than this resin. So to bring you up to speed with the heights on my drop test, I go from a really low sort of like coffee table height of about 20 inches high Then there's the tabletop gaming type height of about 34 inches. And then there's the top tier, like, oh dear, I don't know, I was carrying them above my head for some stupid reason, or they're on like a top shelf, which is 62 inches. Now, how I do these tests is I print off 3 of these miniatures by one-page rules. And the reason I go for these is because they're really fiddly. They've got all these like horns that come off, they've got this tail on the back here, this sword, it has like a really thin connection halfway through it. They're just a nice miniature to test out the durability with, because a lot of things are going to be quite similar to this, or at least have something on there that is similar. So I take 3 of these, and basically we see how far we can get before we have none of them left. So on the first test, which is like the little coffee table height, 1 of them broke, which is something you kind of expect. Normally at that height, you'll lose at least 1 of them. The second one, which is like your wargaming tabletop height, the other 2 broke. So I was literally at that middle stage, completely out of lives, and we didn't get to go any further than that because unfortunately they broke. Interestingly, it was all around this sword here, which is the bit that tends to break the easiest. But on every other resin that I've tested so far, or the ABS resins anyway, I've always had them at least get to the top height. At least 1 or 2 of them will get to the top height. Sometimes I'll get beyond it, but with this one, unfortunately, that's just not the case. So although you get some fantastic quality with them, which, you know, it's hard to argue with, they are a little bit more fragile, which is to be expected. They don't advertise this as being like super durable and being able to withstand drops. So it's just something to bear in mind. If you're a tabletop gamer, for example, and you're printing off your minis, you'll get better quality, but they are more likely to break. And that really sums up the resin. Working with it, a bit of a pain. I found it very, very sticky, very goopy and everything else, but it's something that you can quite easily overcome by having different types of IPA bath to clean up the resin at different stages. The quality, it's really hard to argue with. It gives fantastic quality. So that 8K resin labeling and advertising they're doing, it's not night and day, but it's certainly there. And once you've got the miniatures in front of you or your models in front of you, you should be able to see a bit of a difference. The area it comes down to is fragility. So if you're printing off things like Henry Cavill here, for example, or your busts, or just stuff that you want to look fantastic, this, if I drop it, it's not going to break. It's solid resin. This is a really heavy beastie. So if you're printing things like that that aren't fragile and you want top tier quality, this is fantastic. However, if it's tabletop gaming, miniatures, role-playing miniatures, and all of that, then probably not. You probably want to be looking for something like the ABS-like resins. Of course, you could mix this resin as well with a different type of resin to add a little bit more, but this is all about what you get straight out of the bottle without any tinkering. So I hope that has helped you if you are trying to decide whether or not you can go for some 8K resin, if you want to go for some ABS-like resin. Let me know in the comments, have you got any questions as well? I'll do my best to answer those. In the meantime, hit that like and subscribe button, come along for some more 3D printing content in the future, and I'll see you soon. Bye.